The media fixates on hypersonic missile tests out of North Korea. This is a deliberate misdirection. A kinetic launch is a high-cost, low-probability gambit, a brute force weapon for a bygone era. It is loud, expensive, and its vector is immediately traceable. The strategic class views these displays not as a threat, but as performance art for a domestic audience. The real vector for systemic collapse is not a launch on warning scenario. The accelerant is internal state failure. When a regime like Iran's faces internal revolt with dozens dead and thousands arrested, its solvency is compromised. The leadership is cornered. Lacking the liquidity for symmetric warfare, their only protocol is asymmetric escalation. This protocol does not target cities, it targets data. The primary liability of a superior adversary is its total dependence on connectivity. According to CSIS analysis, over 95% of global data traffic, including trillions in daily financial transactions, travels through a few hundred undersea fiber optic cables. The real threat isn't a bang, it's silence. Severing these critical nodes, or blinding key satellites in low Earth orbit, achieves a state of strategic paralysis at a fraction of the kinetic cost. It does not destroy the adversary, it blinds it. A Leviathan with no eyes and no ears cannot command its fleets, clear its transactions, or stabilize its markets. This is the blueprint for the blind Leviathan, a method for a desperate, failing state to trigger a systemic financial crisis in a superior power, creating a zero-sum window for its own survival. The motive is not ambition, it is bankruptcy. A state facing a solvency crisis, where its domestic liabilities exceed its capacity to govern, operates on a zero-sum survival protocol. CSIS analysis frames the conflict in Ukraine not as a war of choice, but as a desperate bid to manage a pre-existing domestic liability. The kinetic cost of symmetric warfare became mathematically unsustainable. When a regime cannot afford victory through conventional means, its only remaining protocol is asymmetric escalation. This is not a strategic preference. It is a mathematical function of internal state failure. We see this blueprint across the spectrum. North Korea's pursuit of hypersonic weapons is a direct leverage play against a superior adversary's balance sheet. Iran, consumed by internal protests, signals that all bets are off because its leadership is cornered by its own insolvency. Weakness forces the pivot. Desperation is the accelerant. This makes a nation's internal stability the single most critical indicator for predicting external kinetic events. The mathematical foundation of modern warfare has inverted. A state's capacity to project kinetic force is no longer a function of its industrial base. It is a function of its cost per kill ratio. According to analysts at the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, the cost differential is the critical metric. A modern main battle tank represents a $5 million liability on a symmetric battlefield. In contrast, a commercially available FPV drone, weaponized for targeted strikes, is an asset acquired for less than $500. This is not an incremental change. It is a systemic phase shift known as the democratization of violence. The state's historical monopoly on effective high-lethality platforms has been broken by the economics of the microchip. Any regime facing a domestic solvency crisis, such as the internal revolt seen in Iran or the economic collapse modeled by Venezuela, is now algorithmically incentivized toward asymmetric protocols. They lack the capital for symmetric conflict, but possess near unlimited access to low-cost, high-impact, asymmetric assets. The result is a new, terrifyingly stable launch-on-warning posture for failing states. Cornered leadership, with no path to internal legitimacy, views external escalation not as a choice, but as the only remaining protocol for survival. For them, leveraging a swarm of $500 drones against a superior adversary's critical infrastructure is not an act of war. It is a liquidity event. This makes domestic instability the primary accelerant for global kinetic conflict. The math is irrefutable. The primary vector for kinetic conflict is not a conventional battlefield. It is a gray zone, a state space where the rules of symmetric warfare are suspended. These zones are not the cause of systemic risk. They are its laboratories. They are selected based on a single criterion: the internal solvency of the state actor. We are not watching nation-states compete. We are watching cornered leadership run asymmetric protocols. Examine the data points. Reports detail escalating protests and arrests within Iran, a clear indicator of a domestic legitimacy crisis. In parallel, analysis of Venezuela's economic collapse reveals a blueprint for state failure engineered by commodity dependence and intervention. These are not isolated tragedies. They are controlled experiments in systemic fragility, creating the ideal pressure cooker environment required for the next phase. When a regime's internal state fails, its survival protocol is asymmetric escalation. The gray zone becomes a staging ground for signaling disproportionate threats. North Korea's declared hypersonic weapons tests are not for parade. They are a launch-on-warning signal to superior adversaries. Similarly, when Israeli leadership states all bets are off regarding Iran, it is a direct acknowledgement of this protocol. The threat is not invasion. It is the leveraging of non-conventional assets born from desperation. According to analysts at CSS and RUSI, the most critical error is mistaking the symptom for the disease. The instability itself is not the primary threat. The threat is its utility as a proxy laboratory. Warnings about growing instability in nations like South Africa or even Canada are not merely regional concerns. They are indicators of potential new staging grounds, selected to test the vulnerabilities of Western critical infrastructure at a lower kinetic cost. Domestic instability anywhere on the globe becomes a forward operating base for systemic warfare. The launch-on-warning doctrine is a Cold War protocol dictated by mathematical certainty. It mandates a retaliatory nuclear strike upon detection of an incoming attack before enemy warheads can impact and destroy a nation's own arsenal. Waiting for confirmation is not an option. It guarantees decapitation. The protocol is absolute. If the system indicates an inbound launch, the counter launch is executed. It is a use it or lose it zero-sum calculation. This protocol is the primary vulnerability in modern warfare. The fog of digital war is not about kinetic destruction, it is about data corruption. A sophisticated cyber attack does not need to level a city. It only needs to blind the adversary's early warning system, its satellites, its ground-based radar, its command and control networks. In that moment of electronic blindness, the commander is cornered. The screen is blank. Is it a system malfunction, a solar flare, or a deliberate cyber attack masking a decapitating first strike? The launch-on-warning protocol does not allow for ambiguity. Faced with the possibility of total annihilation, the only directive is to assume the worst-case scenario and launch. This is the apex of asymmetric escalation. A state facing a domestic solvency crisis, such as the internal revolt seen in Iran, lacks symmetric military options. According to analysts at RUSI, their only viable protocol is to leverage disproportionate threats against a superior adversary's critical vulnerabilities. By triggering the defender's own launch protocol through a cyber attack, the kinetic cost is outsourced. The aggressor forces a systemic collapse without firing a single missile. The mathematical certainty is that internal state failure is the primary accelerant for global kinetic conflict. When a regime's domestic solvency is compromised, its survival protocol shifts from stability to asymmetric leverage. CSIS analysis confirms that states under severe internal pressure, such as the widespread protests documented in Iran, develop disproportionate, non-conventional capabilities as a low-cost deterrent. This is not a theory. It is a launch-on warning posture driven by desperation. For a cornered state, a symmetric war is unwinnable. The only remaining vector is an attribution impossible strike against a superior adversary's critical vulnerability. The objective is not victory, but to signal that all bets are off, creating a new and unbearable liability for the opponent. The calibration shot will occur within 12 months. A catastrophic, multi-day systems failure will paralyze a critical Western maritime logistics hub, the Port of Los Angeles, or Felixstowe. The event will be a full-spectrum logistics blackout, from crane operations to customs clearance. Official attribution will point to a sophisticated ransomware attack. It is not. It is the calculated non-kinetic signal from a state demonstrating its ability to impose systemic economic cost at will.